In business, the most important asset is not your patents, it's not your products, it's not the buildings, it's the people. If you concentrate on building a business and not the man, you will not succeed. But if you build the man, you achieve both. That was my dad's quote. If you can't build relationships, you're not going to be very successful because everything is built upon relationships.
As you think about your journey, who is that one person that really helped you rise the most?
My dad, Hal Wing, I was around him more than anyone. One of his talents was that he could see people, not just in their current state, but he saw potential in people.
Your dad built up the people around him, and as he assembled this team, it helped everybody rise to that next level.
Hal was so fair. If it's not a great deal for everybody around the table, then it's not a good deal.
Say you're sitting in the chair and you feel like you're going to start a new company. Based on what you learned from your dad, what's the first thing that you would do?
The big thing is the relationships and the people. If I was to start another company, I would.
All right. So grateful to have you here, Doug, and welcome to We Rise Together.
Thank you. We've been talking about doing this for quite a while. So I know you're busy, and so I'm grateful to be here. Hopefully we can have a good discussion today about this.
Well, we also are in Studio B, so we had a little technical difficulty, and that's all part of the experience. It's all part of doing a podcast. It's all part of everything. So we are at Studio number B here, but the message is going to be the same. And when Doug's a dear friend of mine, and I thought, you know what, just knowing your background and I mean, like everyone heard, Doug is a published author. He has some incredible books that we're going to talk about. Was part of an incredible company that we're going to talk about, and just has some amazing stories that talk about rising together. And that's what this show's all about: is going it alone and trying to do it alone, and trying to get to our goals and objectives in life without the help of others. We can definitely rise together. So, Doug, let's start off with, give me your background and tell us about your origin story, and just, kind of start at the beginning. And then as we go through that, I do have some questions I want to ask you, but I think you're naturally going to answer some of those
Mhm.
as we have a conversation. But let's start off. Tell me about your background, and let's start there.
Well, I was born in Germany, and my dad was over there in the military, met my mother, and she didn't know English and he didn't know much German, but showed up at her house one day, found out where she lived. My dad was he was quite the guy. He went, whatever he wanted in life, nothing could really stop him. He had a lot of confidence in his abilities, but ended up going over, he was in the military, met my mom, and eventually he was out of the military, moved back to Utah. And he was really good salesman. He was always good with people, could really relate good with people. And so he went to work for an insurance company in Salt Lake, and they shipped him back to Germany because by this time, he was totally fluent in German. And so we moved back there. My brother was the only one that, the siblings alive at that time, and then I was born there. And so that's kind of how life started. We then moved back to Utah, where I spent most of my life growing up in Utah. We moved back to Germany eventually, again, one more time. And that's where my father found the little giant ladder idea. And that's, we lived there again, worked doing insurance stuff, and then we moved back to Utah and never left Utah. So that's where he found the original design of the little giant. And then I started working for my dad when I was 10 years old, cleaning bathrooms, cleaning the warehouse, eventually moving up into manufacturing and production, and learned every aspect of the business. Only had one company I ever worked for. I worked there for 45 years. And that's pretty rare nowadays anyway. And then also worked with my dad, for my dad, worked together with him as a partner, and learned every part of the aspect of the company. And when my father retired, my brother and I took over the business, became the majority shareholders, grew the business in a major way. And but along the way, there was a lot of ups and downs. The company almost went out of business a couple times, did go out of business one time, and my dad got the business back, and so there's a lot to talk about there, but ended up retiring, and so I just learned so much from a dad that was just an amazing person, businessman. But one thing that my dad did recognize was that he couldn't do it alone. And there's on Little Giant's building, still to this day, there's a little plaque on there that says, if you concentrate on building a business and not the man, you will not succeed. But if you build the man, you achieve both. And so that was my dad's quote. And he put that on there, and he was really a builder of people. People sometimes say, "Oh man, he built an amazing ladder," but really, Hal Wing built people, and then they helped him build the products and build the company. But he was just amazing at realizing that it takes, you've got to have these relationships with your employees, with your vendors, with your customers, with your family, really. And it's just relationships is, if you can't build relationships in life, you're not going to be very successful because everything is built upon relationships.
Well, it's funny. I was just going to ask you a question. So, those of you who are listening, those of you who are watching, Doug dropped a name, a familiar brand, a national brand called Little Giant Ladder. Not quite a little company, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And you mentioned your dad. And so, this is kind of a question I'm going to ask you that I probably already know the answer to, but I know there's probably some facets to it that you would probably add to it. But as you think about your journey, think about your life, I always like to ask the people on the show, who was it? Who are some of those key players? I like to try and pick one, and some people are like, well, I can't pick one. But who are those or the person that helped you rise to where you are at today? I mean, I'm guessing there's probably a specific person, and I'm going to guess your dad. Spoiler alert. But, but yeah, how did he help you rise to where you're at and to get where you are, and how is he a part of that? I'm answering for you, but was that person your dad? Me asking the question, who is that one person that really helped you rise the most or helped you get to where you are? Am I answering for you, or is there somebody else?
Well, I would say there's probably three people in my life that
Okay.
I look to. That one was my grandfather, who was my dad's dad, right? And he was an amazing guy. He worked for the railroad his whole life. He was a supervisor on the railroad, but in his spare time, he farmed 11 acres, which I don't know how he did it, but he grew every kind of fruit and vegetable. He had an immaculate um, garden, and there was not a weed in the place. And so he was just had this incredible work ethic. My dad always says he got his work ethic from his father because my dad grew up on this farm and, learned how to do everything, the irrigation, all this other stuff. And it kind of in a weird way, I mean, my dad always said he got his confidence from his mother, which was is different. A lot of times, I don't know, I guess most people, look to their dad as kind of the role model, but my grandma always told him you can do anything you want to in life and really instilled that in him. And so my dad, Hal Wing, had an amazing confidence, not an arrogance. So that's one thing I really learned from him, and also the work ethic from my grandfather. And later, when I was not serving a mission for my church, my mission president was a general, retired general in the Air Force, and he was so organized. And when he was dressed, he was like just, his hair was always perfect, his suits were always perfect, his shoes were polished, but he was so organized, and I had a chance to be, around him a lot in leadership, and he really taught me how to be organized. My dad was super organized as well. I mean, but President Greenwood was really amazing at that, and he was by, he was like by, he got up at a certain time, and he really instilled in us, hey, we've got to get up at this time and keep the rules and have, a little bit of structure in your life. And so those are the three people, but really my father, I was around him more than anyone, and I would say, I mean, the first thing I learned from my dad was he was just an amazingly hard worker, and he had this incredible self-belief. But one of his talents is that he could see people not. in the current, not just in their current state, but he saw potential in people. So he would see somebody and he's like, that guy can be one of my leaders. And he would build that person and help him and mentor him. He was so good at that. And he always put the right people in the bus of the company. But he had this vision of he could see somebody in the future where they could be, where they could be. Like, for example, he brought in a gentleman that I went to high school with. I was still on my mission, and he came home. He was a year earlier than me. And this guy, his name's Ryan Moss. He started in the production of the company, never went to a day of school as far as college. And he's the CEO of Little Giant Ladders today. So he went all the way from, running punch presses and working his way all the way up and then, became the CEO of the company and is still the CEO of the company. He's really a great guy, but he was mentored by Hal,
Mm,
and Hal saw this vision of, hey, I think this guy, has a lot of abilities. His real strength too, Ryan's was, is that he had a really good mind for developing new products, innovation through the company. Gosh, he's probably got 40 or 50 patents in the company, but he later rose to be the CEO of the company. And so here I am, his son, I'm not the CEO of the company, but my dad saw my talent in that I was pretty good at sales and I could develop relationships with people and that I was, successful there. My brother did a lot of international sales and travel with different partners there. And then my brother worked on the infomercial that we had that was so wildly successful. So, here's two of his sons who aren't CEO, but later became the chairman and the vice chairman of the company, working alongside with the CEO. It was kind of a unique situation where we were the owners and, he was technically our boss, but we were technically really his boss. So but he was good about putting people in the right places, but he was a builder of people. And then he loved his people so much. The way he treated his employees, the way he treated his vendors, the way he treated his distributors, but specifically, mostly him, he always said the people in the business are your most important asset. But I've had people, that worked for him for, 20, 30 years say, we knew your dad loved us so much that that made us work even harder for him. And so when you know that someone's got your back, and I'll give you a story about that,
please.
about how Hal would build people and how he loved them, and then they would just work really hard for him. We had an employee that his wife, they were young, they were probably mid to late 20s, and they had like three kids, and his wife, it was kind of a fluke thing. She had a stroke. She was really young. She had a stroke and was down and out for a while. And my dad went to this individual and said, hey, you go home and take care of your wife. I'm going to continue to pay you as if you were working. And when you come back, your job will still be here. And so this guy was gone for probably 6 months, 8 months. He got full salary. Um, and my dad
Probably
just says, come,
benefits.
yeah, yeah, everything. He said, come back when your wife's better. He comes back. I mean, can you imagine a boss today doing that for you? Saying, hey, we're going to take care of everything. And that happened on multiple occasions. People whose spouse or employees who had cancer or whatever, he would say, your job is secure. I mean, my dad even went on vacation, like water skiing down to Lake Powell or dirt biking, and he would take employees and say, I'm going to pay you to go with me and do this. And they'd go have fun with him and go on vacation with him. And then he would pay them as if they were working. He was just a
Mhm.
great boss. He was just he just did stuff that nobody does today, or, and so people were so loyal to him because he was so good to them. So those are some of the things that I learned from my dad. And he was so honest too. He had a little saying that he would tell the salespeople, you can tell the customer anything you want to, as long as it's the truth. And so he had these core values at the company. We started every meeting that we had with a prayer, and it didn't matter what religion you were. We had, people of many faiths, and every meeting started with prayer every time we did it. And, that really, those types of things, uh, just people loved working for him.
Well, you touched on so much, and I'm like, wow, how do I unpack all this now? So, you know, great answer to my question there. Like, who you mentioned three people. Your mission president, as you served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who I happen to serve a mission to as well, and I can relate to that because my mission president was Kelvin R. Stevens, and my son's name is Kelvin Stevens Voss. So I named my son after my mission president. So he definitely taught me to rise and how to
Hmm.
rise. And then you mentioned, we talked about your dad a lot too as well, and then your grandpa. And those are three great examples. And so going back to that, what I heard you say was your dad was really good. I mean, your dad was very successful businessman, did really well for himself and made it a point to teach that to his sons. You said he built up the people around him. And so one of the things that I hear common as I interview people on We Rise Together is they do talk about creating this group around them. I think of when someone summits Mount Everest, very rarely do you have like one person or two people, although I think Sir Edmund Hillary, who they named the Hillary step after, I think he did it with just a couple people. But you've got this group around you. So talk more about, I mean, your dad saw the good in people and he assembled this team. And as he assembled this team, it helped everybody rise to that next level. And it sounds like your dad was definitely the master of that in doing that. Is there any other stories that you have that you could share where he took those people around him and put them in those positions and it created this opportunity for the company just to expand and grow?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories, and a lot of the stories that I learned, there were some stories I knew about my dad, but there were others that came out as I wrote books about him. And that's what really inspired me to write that first book, Giant Success. But one of my favorite stories is of an employee that just passed away about a year ago. His name was Jared Keller, great guy. And my dad's hiring, this is in the it'd probably be the early mid to se yeah, early to mid 70s. My dad's hiring manufacturing people, and the HR guy comes to him and says, "Hey, we're going to be hiring probably 10 people for manufacturing. Do you want to sit in on these interviews?" And he says, "Sure." So the HR guy takes the first resume off the stack and crinkles it into a ball and throws it in the trash and says, "We don't even need to interview this guy. He's a loser." And my dad goes over to the garbage can and unwrinkles the paper and goes, "I don't see anywhere on this paper where it says he's a loser." And he says, "Well, you can see on there that he just got out of prison." My dad goes, "Well, what I see on here is that he's an Eagle Scout and that he served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Bring him in. I want to talk to him." And the guy's like, "You're crazy." And my dad's like, "This is my company. I want him to come in."
Mhm.
And so my dad brings this guy in, and he was a policeman. And they have evidence rooms, that they when they arrest somebody and they confiscate things. And Jared went into the evidence room, and he had a little temptation, and he took something out of the evidence room that he shouldn't have taken, and he was caught. And so he went to prison for this. I guess he'd done it a couple times or something.
Mhm.
And so he served his time and came out and changed his life, but he nobody would hire him. And so my dad gave him an opportunity, and he worked for our company for probably 30 years. He moved all the way up and ran manufacturing. He was a foreman, and he never took anything from the company. He was just amazing. But again, Hal Wing had this vision. He saw him, and he's like, "That's the guy." And he brought him in, and he saw potential in him, and he helped build his confidence back up again. And Jared was a great guy, just a super great guy. And again, as I mentioned, just stayed with us until he was retired. And I his wife found out that I'd written this book, and I sent her one, and she just said, "Man, you really wrote a great book about, the stories are just incredible." But things like that again were just incredible. That Hal had this vision, could see people. Well, one of the great stories too about building relationships is that um, Hal was so fair. I talked about the honesty.
Mhm.
We'd be in meetings with vendors, for example. And if my dad thought that we were getting the lion's share, like say from an aluminum supplier or something, he would say, "Hey, this isn't fair. If it's not a good deal for everybody around the table," that's what this is one of his quotes. My first book is filled with all these great quotes, but he'd say, "If it's not a great deal for everybody around the table, then it's not a good deal." And so he'd say, "If I'm getting the lion's share, then that's not right either." And so he was just so fair with people, and wanted them to also be profitable and make money. But is a story in 1981. My dad ended up selling the business and sold it to a big private equity firm in California. And what happened is nobody knew what they were doing. But by the time 1986 rolled around, they were taking all of the money out of the companies that they owned, which were about 30, 40, 50 companies,
Mhm.
and they bankrupted all the business, and it was a big Ponzi scheme. And so here's my dad, 5, 6 years later, he's out of business, doesn't have any money, and they run the company into the ground, and he doesn't know what else to do, but he hears that they're going to have a sheriff's sale where they're going to sell off the not the liabilities but the assets to the company. So my dad kind of figures out, does a little research, says, "Hey, I think I can get the machinery back, and but I'm going to need a building." And so he walks into a bank, and a bank that he had been doing business with for years, who he had a great relationship with, the banker, the president of the bank. He walks in, makes an appointment with him, and walked in. He said, "Hey, I need $1 million. This is what's happened to the business. I don't know when I can pay you back, but I promise you I'm going to pay you back. I don't have any collateral, but I've always kept my word with you guys. Will you give me the money?" Now, this is before the days where they had the committees and all that stuff. But I mean, can you imagine walking into a bank today and to a bank president saying, "I need $1 million," right? There'd be a couple guys taking you out, right? But the president of the bank looks at my dad and he said, "Hal, you've always kept your word. I believe in you." Stands up, shakes his hand. "I'll give you the $1 million." Now, my dad said there was never any paperwork on this, that there was no agreement or anything. It was a handshake deal. My dad went to the sheriff's sale, was able to buy the assets back to the company, got a building, and started it again. And here's the confidence of Hal Wing. I said to him, I go, "Man, wasn't it harder the second time?" And he looks at me and he goes, "No, it was easier." And I go, "Why? How was it easier?" And he goes, "I remembered every mistake I made the first time and I eliminated those, and the success came even quicker." And I'm like, my dad's got mojo, right? I was like, this guy's got the confidence going on. But here he was close to 50 years old, probably mid 40s, and he risked it all again. But again, he had the confidence, he knew how to do it. But to walk into a bank and have that confidence, not an arrogance, right? But a confidence. And the bank says, "Hal, you kept your word. You've always," and again, that goes back to they had a relationship, right? Hal kept his word, always paid the bank back, but the bank believed in him. And that's part of the relationship thing that is a pretty incredible story.
Wow. Everything, people hear me say all the time, everything in life and business is about relationships. And then I talk to all the time about how I kind of use an analogy of hinges on a door, how hinges open up doors. And I call those hinges relationships. And those relationships literally open up doors of opportunity. And your dad, and the story that you
Mhm.
tell, when he walked into that bank, he had a relationship with the individuals that they know, liked, and knew, like, and trusted your dad. But your dad, that wasn't the first. I mean, I'm sure the investment, not on a financial aspect, that he made in those relationships with the people at the bank, like he was able to rise. I mean, if there was a time that your dad was at this low point, I mean, that you're down here, he needed to
Hmm.
rise. He needed to get the company back. He needed to turn it around and do all of that. And all of the work that he had done over the years, he was able to go in and capitalize that and say, "Hey, look, I want to go here. I want to rise here. I need your help." And people were like, "Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%." That's an incredible story.
Excuse me. Yeah, his self-belief was, I think, carried over into these other, obviously the bank president stands up, shakes his hand, "I believe in you," and
Mhm.
I mean, there was another time when our company was we learned the hard way sometimes. We let all of our patents expire or get close to expiring, and we only had a couple of SKUs. We were kind of we were doing pretty good, but our patents were expiring. We were double the money at other companies were, other ladder companies were, and then our patents expired, and all these companies came out at again half our price, right? And we were about ready to go under. And so somebody in the company, it wasn't my dad, it was somebody else. I think it was probably Ryan Moss, our CEO. He said, "Hey, maybe we should do an infomercial. We've done all these shows before. We've done trade shows, home and garden shows. And when we show the product, people buy it." But there was only one problem. That at that time, it cost $1 million to do an infomercial, and we didn't have the money. So my dad we're in this meeting. My dad says, "I'll tell you what I'll do." He says, "I will loan you guys the money. I will mortgage my farm." He had a couple of farms. He says, "I will mortgage one of them and give you the $1 million, but I want my money back in 6 months, and this better work." But he said, to ensure that it's going to work, I'm going to be in the infomercial. This is what my dad says. He goes, "I will do it. And I will do it basically for nothing, but I do want $10 for every ladder that's sold on that infomercial." Now, you got to remember at that time, we were only producing about 400 ladders a day. Okay. And we worked 4 10-hour shifts, and they had a 3-day weekend. Well, when the infomercial went live, we went to 7,000 ladders a day. Okay. And we had to go 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. And you think about the money Hal made on the $10, right? I mean, you can do the math, right? You can do the $10 and we were producing 7,000 ladders. And this went on for, well, in one year we 4 times our sales, and the next year we 4 times our sales again. So in 2 years we were over $200 million in sales. And so the one thing I love about the company is my dad said, "Okay, now that we've had this success, we got to learn from what we did, and we need to branch out and grow our line, right? And go into these different verticals. We need to go into construction. We need to go into the trades and all that stuff." And so we branched out and got new patents and new ladders, and we started listening to what customers wanted, and it grew the company. And now it made it so strong. I mean, we were in Home Depot, we were in Costco, we're in Lowe's, and so everything just all boats rose up. It made the company incredibly strong. But Hal again risked it all. There was people that said, "We need to quit. We need to go find another company. This is going to go under." And my dad's like, "You guys can go quit if you want to, but we're going to make it." He always had that attitude of, "We are going to make it." And so he just had the confidence, and that confidence helped others to get confidence as well.
You know, your dad had some phenomenal relationships with people. They trusted him. He had integrity. He surrounded himself with winners, but also surrounded around himself with people that he saw the potential. And so, what I love about the stories you're telling me, it's like, well, I didn't go out and just handpick all the winners, all the A players. Like he would go out. I mean, you mentioned people that someone wasn't going to give a chance to, and your dad's like, "Hey,
Mhm.
we rise together. You know what? I see where you're at. I know the potential where you can go. Let's do this together." I mean, your dad, that's what I love about these stories. It's the epitome of rising together. It's like I'm not on this interview and you're saying, "My dad did this, my dad did that." As you're telling me these stories, yeah, your dad's involved in these, but these
Mhm.
stories are all tying into other people that he partnered up with, employees or banks, wherever, that allowed your dad to be able to rise to where he is. He clearly did not get there by himself. He did it with people. And
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and there's another great story too, is he taught other people this too that weren't even involved in the company. Like a couple years ago, a guy comes up to me and I don't know where I met him. I can't even remember, but the guy goes, "Hey, I got a great story for you. I used to be your guys' business banker." He goes, "This was back in the very beginning of the company." And
Mm.
he goes, "But I learned a very valuable lesson from your dad." He goes, "Your dad called me on the phone and said, 'I need a loan for some machinery. This is my interest rate that I want. This are the terms that I want. This is how much it's going to cost. That this is how much I want to borrow." And he said, "Give me a call if you can do this. And I don't like to wait." My dad said, "Just have everything ready for me. I'm going to come into the bank. I'm going to sign it. I'm going to pick up the check." And that was the days when, you went to get a business, like a loan or even a mortgage a while ago. And, they would be like this thick. So my dad walks into the bank. This guy's telling me this story. And my dad walks into this bank, and the guy said, "Your dad turns to the last page. He doesn't read any of the stuff in the loan, and he gets his pen out." And the guy goes, "Wait a minute, Hal. Wait, wait, wait. Aren't you going to read this before you sign it?" And he said, "Your dad looked at me and said, if everything that we talked about on the phone is not in this document, this will be the last time you and I will ever do business." And he signed it and took the check. And the guy said, when your dad walked out, he goes, "I had to read through the whole, I was so afraid. I read through the whole thing just to make sure everything that your dad asked for was in there," because he goes, "I learned a lesson that that would be the last time I would ever do business with your dad if I did it over on him, right? If I screwed him over, sorry about my French, I guess there, but if I
No.
didn't do what your dad asked for in there," he goes, "that was the last time we were going to do business." And so he goes, "I hurried and frantically read through everything." And he's like, "Whew, okay." But he goes, the lesson there was you got to listen and you got to give what the customer asks. And again, that's building a relationship. And after that, he goes, "I was still your dad's banker, but I had one crack at it. And your dad told me that." In that, he went right to that paper and signed it. So just little lessons like that. My dad was so smart. He was his common sense was amazing, but he was just so good with people. In other words, he was saying, "You can get me once, but you're not going to get me again," you know?
So, really crazy question. So, say you're sitting in the chair and you come up with this idea and you've got this entrepreneurial bee, you're where you're at right now in your life, and all of a sudden you just feel like you're going to do something all over again. Like, I'm going to do this venture, I'm going to start out, and I'm going to start this new company. I just feel like I need to. Based on what you learned from your dad and everything that we talk about relationship and rising together, what's the first thing that you would do? Or who's the first person you would go to? Or who's the first person you would talk to? Or who's the first person you would approach? Because I mean, you have risen with all these people
Mhm.
around you. So you got this great idea. You know it's going to be big. What's step number one that Doug Wing is going to do based on these great people that you've learned from? What are you going to
Well, this happened to me, and I've got another company that I'm working in now. And okay, I had a friend,
do?
he's super successful in real estate. He said, it was probably, I was working at Little Giant, and I was probably in my mid 30s, maybe 40s. And he said, "You and I are going to be partners someday." And I said, "You're crazy. I'm building ladders, and you've got apartments." And he goes, "No, we're going to be partners someday." Well, my brother and I sold the business, and I started. Um, I went through a really costly divorce, and he said to me, we were just good friends, and he said, "You need to, you're paying a lot of money. You lost a lot of money in this divorce, and when you can, you should start buying real estate, multifamily housing." So I did that, and I owned the properties myself. I
Hmm.
had about 10 properties,
Hmm.
and when I sold Little Giant, he approached me and he said, "Hey, I remember when I told you we were going to be partners," and he's like, "Let's start a new company." And it was myself and Robert and Dallin who were partners in this other company, but we had been friends for quite some time. We'd, been in different church things together, and sure enough, we came together and formed this new company. But I will say that really, the most important thing about that business was that I knew that Robert and Dallin, my partners, were really men of integrity and that they were honest as the day is long, and we all have the same values. And so for me and my new partners, again, I would say it's the people, the relationships that I had. Again, that's why we went into business together, is because I knew these men, that they were good men, honest men, they were fair men. And so we are all, now we all are one-third partners in this business. They run the company. They're younger than I am. They know more about the company than I would as far as what we do in real estate. And so again, I don't have an ego to where I'm like, "Oh, I need to be running this company." They know what they're doing. And honestly, I don't really, I mean, I go to some meetings maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and look at reports and things like that, but they run the business. And so they're doing a great job. And if they ever need me for anything, or, we have a new idea or some other thing we're going to start. We've started different businesses like we own an axe throwing business. We have a escape key business. We even have a restaurant in Provo, Utah that we started as well. So we have these little businesses that we start and we're like, okay, we're willing to risk some of our money to start these different businesses. But again, we have really good people that help us as well. It's pretty close to what we're doing, with Little Giant, but I think the big thing is the relationships and the people in these new companies that we trust each other. We know that we're honest and have integrity and those types of things. So for me, if I was to start another company, I would either do it. I mean, I probably would have a couple people in there with me that would know more about it than what I would, but it would be people that I trust and like and that I believe in.
I love that. And as we're talking about rising together, I want to ask you another question about your dad. But before we do that, talk about all the books that you've done. I know you've got something else that you're working on. Can you tell everybody about your books, where they can find them?
Yeah.
And let's talk about those for a second.
Yeah, so a good friend of mine, um, who actually did sales training for Little Giant, his name's Jeffrey Gitomer. He's written about 20 books. One of his books that he wrote, I think it's either the Sales Bible or the Little Red Book of Selling is like the number one book that's ever been written on sales. And so he would come and work with me and our team and do training. And so I've known him for quite a few years. After I was done at Little Giant, I started telling Jeffrey some of these stories about my dad and just the things that he did, and I learned from him. And he says, "You need to write." And that well, going back, my dad started writing a book, and then he passed away. And I told Jeffrey about this, and he says, "My gosh, these stories are incredible." He goes, "I promise you, if you write this book, it's going to be a number one best-selling book." And I kind of laughed at him. I thought, I don't know anything about writing books, and it kind of stalled out. I started it and it kind of started out and it was during COVID and he got really mad at me. He's from New Jersey, so he cusses a lot and he got in my face one day. I was at a mastermind down in North Carolina and he said, "Write the blankety blank book," And I was like, "Okay, I got to write this book."
Mm.
He wrote the foreword to it, and sure enough, everything that he said that would happen happened. The book became a number one best-selling book. And And so I was I thought, wow, this is great. I've written one book. And then I met Mark Victor Hansen, who is one of the co-creators of Chicken Soup for the Soul. So my first book was with a different publisher. And I met Mark at a restaurant with another friend and was telling him,
A small author, by the way, Mark Victor Hansen.
yeah,
Just
he's huge,
kind of he's done a couple books.
What does
Oh,
it say on this book? It says he's a 59 times New York best-selling author, so this is giant success. And this is volume two, version two. It's no second edition, and he's now the publisher of all my books. But he told me, he goes, "Man, you've got some great stories." I said, "What am I going to? How much? Why? How can I write more books?" And he goes, "You have so many great stories." He goes, "I'd like to do a fiction book with you, several if you can, and you tell the stories. We're going to change the names of people. They will be real stories, and we'll do a series." So the next one was this book called The Giver. And so in this book, I um, there's a father-son characters in here. The dad is John Ward, and the son is Spencer Ward. And so I go through and talk about some of these stories and put it into the Ward family. And they have a different business, but it's in manufacturing. And that one became a bestseller too. Mark told me you're gonna get another best-selling book, and it happened. So then we did another one. This is my third one that's called Giving Hearts. And this is through Mark Victor Hansen too. And this one is from the Ward family, but it's another would be an uncle to John named Evan Ward, and it talks about his life and their real stories. Um, and so that was my third book, and then I was talking to Mark a couple weeks ago, and he says he knows that I'm going away on a church mission for a year, and he said after you get back, I want to write the story about your life. And I'm like, I don't know if I have enough to do this. We're doing a Zoom together, not not like what we're doing, but he just a Zoom together talking about stuff. And so we were talking for half an hour, and he goes, I can already think of the first three or four chapters of your book right now. And we recorded that Zoom, which was nice. And he said, here they are. And he laid them out for me. And I was like, wow, that's why he is who he is. But
Mhm.
so anyway, I think I'll probably do one more book, with Mark. And it would be, we've already got the title because it's actually the title that my dad named his book. So it's going to be pretty cool. Yeah, that's the
Well,
plan.
so you can get all these, you go to Amazon,
Yeah, you can
go
go
to
to
Amazon
Amazon or
or your
also
website, right?
Yeah, DougWing.com. If you want a signed one, I sign them and we send them out. I'm doing a little bit of speaking. I just got back from Utah. I'm really busy doing other things, and so I don't spend a lot of time doing that. But there are times when I speak at different venues and schools or church stuff, which I like to do, but not that many times. But I will do some speaking engagements and talk about these things. I just got back from Utah and did one for Utah Recycling Coalition. I've been there two times now, but they really like it, and I think people are benefiting from these stories, and they bought 50 books, and everybody that was there got one. So it was fun to do that. And like I said, every once in a while I do those, but I flew over 2 million miles on an airplane, mostly Delta, and at this point in my life, I know that I could do it again. I've had a couple people contact me and say, you could go speak at Fortune 500, 100 companies and do this. And at this point in my life, I'm doing other things, I don't want to fly around the world again and do all this stuff.
If as we finish up here, if you said, "Hey, Dad, come here for a second, and give us some advice on how important it is to rise together," what would your dad say? What do you think would be his message? And then after you share that, finish that off with what your message is, so that our people that are watching this, people that are listening to this, can walk away as we finish off the interview with something that they can apply to their life, thinking about this concept of how we rise together, that people, don't go it alone. Don't try
Hmm.
and go through the life alone. Don't try and do these business deals alone. Your joint ventures, your partnerships, your collaborations, whatever. If your dad could come in here, Dad, give him one thing, give him one nugget. We were talking about rising together. What would your dad say? And then you build on top of that and tell me what Doug White thinks.
Well, my dad would say that one thing that he said all the time is, my people carry me to the top of the mountain every day, meaning my employees. And then he would always say, in business, the most important asset that you will ever have will be your people. It's not your patents, it's not your products, it's not the buildings, it's the people. And he goes, they will either make or break you. And then he went into saying, you have to get to the point where you treat these people the way that they need to be treated. And I believe that my dad treated his employees just like they were his own family, and that he loved them and cared about them, and they knew it. Hal Wing came through the back door every day and greeted 400 people. Whoever was around, he had 400 employees. He would stop and talk to every one of them. He knew every person by name and what was going on in their lives. Most people that I have met that are bosses come through the front door, they walk past the receptionist, they go into their office, close the door, sit in there all day and have meetings, and then come out and leave. But Hal had a pulse not only on the company, but on his people, on the people of what as well, which is more important. He knew what they were going through. He knew, how he could help them, and that's what he did. So that's one thing that I think really helped Little Giant be successful, was that Hal Wing had the knowledge of what was most important in the company. He knew that, and he built the people, and the people built a fantastic company, helped him do it because he couldn't do it by himself. And he's the one that used to say, I'm not the smartest guy there in the company, but he always surrounded himself with people that were, that could do the job. and he was just great. He was just great. He was a phenomenal guy. He was only 5 feet tall, my or 5'7", my dad was, but he was a giant. He really was the little giant, and he was a builder of people.
Builder of people. I mean, if you could not, rising together is what you just said, and that was so absolutely amazing. All right, build on top of that for Doug Wing. What you learned from your dad. You just shared with us what I mean, your dad built a multi-million dollar company,
Hmm.
gave people employment and jobs for decades and decades. People still talk about him today. People come up to you and say, I got to tell the story about your dad. And everything, all these stories are all centered around people and rising together and get, like you said, getting to the top of the mountain. So finish us off here and build on top of that. Give us the Doug Wing version of what you've seen and what you've learned with who's helped you rise to where you're at today. Give us a nugget that people can walk away with that they can apply because I know that you have one because there's amazing stuff in there. Share us with, finish us off with one.
Well, one of my favorite quotes that is not a Hal quote is from Zig Ziglar, and he says, "You can have anything and everything you want to in life if you help enough other people get what they want." And that is so true. Most people today are selfish. They're thinking about themselves, and it's worse than ever before. My dad would always say three things influence people: greed, sex, and greed. Most people get a double dose of greed. And we can see that today more than any time, probably, in the history of the world. But if you will just take the time and help enough other people get what they want, you will get what you want. And I do believe that. I've seen it in my life. I was able to be mentored by one of the great men who realized that that was a true statement and did everything he could to build other people. And those people helped him climb the ladder of success to the top, and it works. If you help enough other people get what they want, you will get what you want. And so, and you can do it with integrity. My dad always said, one of his quotes too was, "Don't lie, don't steal, and don't be lazy." And so, again, those types of things, having complete integrity. One of my dad's friends I interviewed said, "I saw your dad in a lot of stressful situations year after year for 40 years." And he goes, "I never heard your dad swear one time ever in his life." And he said he was under stress a lot. And so he was just a unique person, but again, he had integrity, was honest, but knew how to be successful, and that was by building people. And so again, as we carried on in the business and as we have our new business now, we know we have great people working for us. We have the right people in the right spots, and we try to do the exact same thing that he did, is let's build our people and they will be loyal to us. And that's so important today more than ever before, is it's so hard to find good people now who really want to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you'll show people you love them and you care about them and you want them to be successful, they will work hard for you and they'll stay loyal to you, and you'll be a success. I have no doubt about it.
I just think a lot of the people that work for the company, how they for sure walked in and just knew that, hey, we're building this company, we're building this legacy, we're doing it together, we rise together. And so that's what this show's about. Thank you so much for sharing all the stories you did about your dad. And please, if you're watching, you're listening, go to dougwing.com.
.com.
You can get access to all of Doug's books. You can find them on Amazon. And so excited about everything you're doing with that. And yeah, I have a We Rise, or I have a Giant Success shirt, and that's a shirt I wear every single day when I do my 3 miles every day. It says I wear the same shirt every time. I wash it every night. So if you see me, I've got my Giant Success t-shirt. But Doug, thanks so much for being here and sharing these stories about your dad. And it's really appreciate you coming on the show, coming on We Rise Together, and really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no problem. And we will see you in Michigan next April.
So, little tidbit here. Doug and I are dear friends, and the craziest thing about it, and this is one thing that we learned through this crazy thing called COVID and just the evolution of meeting people and building relationships. We haven't been able, I could not put my hand. I wish I could reach through and just put my hand on this guy's shoulder and then pull him in and give him a big hug. Like, I haven't been able to hug this guy. I've not physically been in the same room, but it's like we've been friends for decades, and we met through a mutual friend, and we definitely rise together. I mean, Doug, you've been a really big part of my journey, and you've helped me rise as I've gone along my journey. And so I'm super grateful for that. And that's why I was like, I've got to interview you on the show and talk about the amazing examples you had in your life and the example that you are to so many people about rising together. So thank you so much for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Come back for our next episode. And really, thanks again, Doug, for being on We Rise Together. It was great
Thank you,
talking to
Chris.
you.
Yep. Talk to you soon.